the bed, and the room was absolutely freezing. I mean, ice cold. And I remember as I got into bed, I made this little cocoon out of the blanket that I was sleeping in. I burrowed down deep inside this cocoon, and I quickly fell asleep as my body heat kind of just warmed up underneath the covers. But I woke up at some point, I don't know how long afterwards, but I woke up in a panic. I had these beads of sweat coming down my forehead, and I could hardly breathe at all. I had made this cocoon so tight, I was just basically trapped inside this burrito of warmth. And I remember, because I was awaking from sleep, I was so disoriented, I started flashing around and flailing around, trying to find my way outside the covers. And I think I would be so embarrassed if anybody had seen how long it took me to get on the other side of the covers. But I also remember, and maybe you know the feeling, when you pull the covers off and that fresh, cold air just rushes into your lungs, and it's like this great relief. You wanted it so badly, and I remember thinking back on this and thinking, well, my life wasn't really in danger, but it felt like it was in the moment. I mean, I had just woken up. I didn't really know what was going on. It was absolutely miserable, but the feeling of that fresh air felt so good. I want to walk through Romans chapter 8. I know this is, don't worry, we'll do it really quickly. We're going to walk through Romans chapter 8, and I just want to give you the background of this chapter before I talk about two verses in particular. But I'm going to don't take me out and stone me or anything, but I'm going to have my own version here. I'm just going to give you the bullet points of the first part of Romans chapter 8. In Romans chapter 8, Paul says in verse 2, the law of the Spirit sets us free in Christ. In verse 3, he basically says, the flesh is weak, but God is not. In verse 5, he basically says, don't live for you, for the flesh, because the flesh is weak. Live for God, because God is more powerful than the flesh. In verse 6, he says, set your mind on the Spirit for life and peace. Set your mind on the Spirit, not the flesh, and that is where you'll find life and peace. Then looking at verses 9 through 11, you'll see that basically Paul talks about if you're a Christian, you have power. If you're serving the Spirit, not the flesh, you have power. Verse 12 through 17, he says that those of the flesh are going to suffer. Those that serve the flesh are going to suffer. But he doesn't say those that serve the Spirit are not going to suffer. But what he does say is those of the flesh that serve the flesh, they're going to suffer, but they're going to do it alone. Those that serve the Spirit are going to suffer, but they're going to do it with God. They're going to do it with power. There were two groups of people. It was an experiment that was done at a college or some university. I didn't have time to look up all the facts. I was told 5 minutes before I got up here, this is what I'm doing. But there were two groups of people that it was a social experiment, I guess, and they put them in two different classrooms, and the goal was to see how well these two groups did taking a test while this loud alarm blared. And I don't think I would do very well at all, but the difference was one group had a button in the room that if they pressed it, it would silence the alarm. But they were told, just take it as long as you can, and when you can't handle the noise anymore, then just press the button and the alarm will stop. The poor other group, I don't know how they decided which group goes into which room, but that group, they didn't have any button. They just had to suffer through that alarm and take the test. Guess which group did better on the test? The group that had the power to silence the alarm. Everybody is going to suffer. And when you look around at the world today, especially in 2020, I mean, it's like, I was told about this hurricane. I'm usually the last one to know about any of these type major events that are happening. I was probably the last one to find out about Corona. But when I heard about this new hurricane that's coming through, it didn't even faze me. It was just kind of like, oh, well, 2020. All that's going to happen. I mean, I'm not even surprised anymore. An avalanche could come through the parking lot right now, and I'd be like, well, just 2020. Both groups of people are going to suffer in this life, but the difference between being a Christian, serving the Spirit, and being someone that serves the flesh is we suffer with the power of Christ. Now, these two verses are the ones I wanted to look at. My two favorite verses in all of Romans. That's verse 18. For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us. And then verse 26. Likewise, it's like Paul is basically saying, oh, and also here's this. The Spirit helps us in our weakness. We don't know what to pray as we ought, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words. It's almost as if Paul is speaking to someone who is struggling with life in the same way that many of us are today. And he's talking to them, basically trying to cheer them up, give them a boost, and say, even if you feel like you don't know how to handle it, don't worry. The Spirit already knows what to say to God on your behalf, or to the Father on your behalf. Basically, Paul's entire point is that future glory. That's what it's titled in my Bible. I have the ESV, this section from verse 18 down to verse 30. It's titled Future Glory. And I like that. Because basically what Paul is trying to tell these people that are suffering, these Christians that are suffering, is that future glory that we have to look forward to is just on the other side of this life. And my covers weren't very thick. They were probably about 3 inches thick, maybe. Fresh air, just on the other side. This life, it might seem like, especially this year, it just drags on forever. But the future glory that we have is just on the other side. And it's going to be better than any breath of fresh air that you've ever had. And I don't know how many of you have gone through that situation. I hope more than just me, because it was a strange predicament. But the question is tonight, and I think that if Paul were to give this in modern language, I guess the language of the 21st century, I think what Paul's invitation would be is, who are you serving tonight? And are you suffering tonight, alone or by yourself? Are you serving the flesh, or are you serving the Spirit? There's hope and peace, and there's hope of that future glory to come if you're serving the Spirit faithfully. And if you're not doing that tonight, maybe because you're not following Christ, and you've strayed away from that Christian walk, or because you haven't put him on in baptism, then you can change that tonight. And your future glory, too, can be just on the other side. If you have a need tonight, then why not come as we stand and as we sing?